In this episode of Bonsai-U, we're going to be working on this Yamadori pinyon pine from the New Mexican desert. Welcome back to a brand new episode of Bonsai-U. This is an exciting episode for me because we're going to be working on one of my favorite trees in the nursery here at Eisei-en. This pinyon pine was collected in the New Mexican desert a couple years back. We actually potted it up this spring, so about 6 months ago. We're filming this right now in October. So about 6 months ago, we potted this tree up. It was originally planted in a wooden container for about a year and a half or so. We potted it up this spring, and as you can see, it's flushed out nicely and it's in a really good state of health. So I've been waiting all summer to get my hands on this tree, and I'm really excited because this is a tree that was actually gifted to the nursery by the collector, who is Richard Lee out of Colorado. So I want to thank Richard for giving this to the nursery so that we can get our hands on it. Now, one of the main reasons that I like this tree is that it's not your typical bonsai. It has inverse taper, it has weird movement to the trunk, it leans really, really far to the left. It's kind of an unbalanced feeling to the tree. Now, all of those flaws, so to speak, on this tree are the reasons why I like it. I like that inverse taper. I like the heavy chunkiness of the middle of the trunk here, and the feeling of the tree as it's leaning to the left almost feels like it's pulling itself out of the pot. Now, the goal today is going to be to manipulate the branches, put them in a better position to create a better sense of balance out of the tree. But before we do that, I want to go through and talk about some of the characteristics of this tree that I really like. Now, if you notice in the middle of the tree right here, this section is really, to me, the main feature of the tree. These sort of wispy little gins that are hanging out on the right side of the trunk here sort of reminds me of a dragon flying into the sky, and these here remind me kind of a dragon's beard. So I thought maybe we could name this tree Ryu no Hige, which is dragon's beard in Japanese. The only problem with that is that when you say Ryu no Hige in Japanese, it actually refers to a different plant, this one right here. So it might cause a little bit of confusion in the Japanese community if they're watching this video, but in any case, doesn't really matter. I think dragon's beard is a good name for this tree. We'll see if that name still fits once we place the branches and design the tree, but I'm thinking that that might be a good option for this tree. First things first though, in designing this tree, I want to pick out the good elements and the bad elements of the tree, and we're going to try to create picture frames around the good elements with the foliage, and we're going to try to eliminate or hide the bad elements on the tree. Again, either removing those or hiding those with the foliage. Of course, let's start at the base of the tree and work our way up. Again, we've got inverse taper at the bottom of the tree here. That's not something that we can really fix on this plant. Now, some people might try to do an air layer, say right up in this area here. With an old Yamadori like this though, that's probably a 20% shot of success, maybe even less than that. So to me, that's too risky. It's not really going to improve the tree that much. So again, we're just going to embrace that negative element down there at the base and essentially leave it alone. Now, you'll notice at the bottom here, we actually put a couple of chopsticks right at the base of the tree for support when we repotted the tree. We've also got this board right here for the same purpose. That was to make sure that the tree was totally stabilized in the pot so that it would put out enough roots over the course of this past growing season to be healthy enough to work on this fall right now. So when we get to the end of designing this tree, we're going to remove those things so you can see what the tree looks like without those there. Now, again, moving up into the middle section of the trunk here, we've got this beautiful feature that gives the tree its name, Ryu no Hige. So I want to make sure to draw your eye to that by manipulating some foliage down and around, hopefully something behind, maybe something over the top here that creates, again, that picture frame that's going to draw your eye right to that. Now, if we work up further into the tree, you can see this beautiful piece of natural deadwood here. I don't want to do anything to that. It's a little bit long, a little bit straight, but if we manipulate foliage around in a certain manner, we can break up that straight line to some degree. Now, if you look at the main structure of the trunk here, this is actually the main trunk line. Now, when this was collected, this died back, so it was flat cut here at the top. Now, we've got a little bit of foliage left up here at the top, but in my opinion, because this section is so straight right here, it's going to detract from the lines in the tree. So this is actually, rather than being moved, it's going to be eliminated. We're going to turn this into a small gin feature down here and use some of this foliage just a little bit lower to create the apex. As a matter of fact, this branch right here might become our new apex on the tree, but we really can't determine that until we get in there and actually clean out a lot of the old needles on the tree. Now, if you come further out to the left here, we've got another branch that's relatively straight. That's another potential option to become an apex, or maybe we'll design this tree in a very odd way where we end up with two apexes on the plant. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a strange plant to begin with. We can always keep that theme throughout the entirety of the tree. So keep that in mind as an option. Now over here to the left, we've got really elongated branching, really stretching out to the left side there. I have a feeling that we're either gonna have to whip that stuff back in or gonna have to eliminate it. It's a little bit too long and it draws your eye away from the feature here. So before we make any major decisions about cutting big branches off, what I wanna do is go through and remove a lot of the old needles on the tree. Now I'm not gonna take off all of the old needles. I'm looking to take off a majority of the needles on the underside of the branch. If we've got individual buds, I'm gonna remove needles between those so we can see the structure and potentially get detail wire in there. And then that'll allow us to make better decisions about what we wanna cut off. So as you're pulling old needles off of pines, you got to keep in mind that at the base of some of those needles, you're going to find little buds. Those are what are called needle buds on the tree. So of course we want to leave all of those intact if possible. So don't just willy-nilly pull the needles off. Make sure you're keeping an eye out for buds like this. Now there really are three types of buds that you're going to find on pines. The needle buds that we just mentioned here, the terminal buds, which are going to form inside the cluster of needles that formed earlier this year. So these are what are going to turn into the candles next year. And then the third type of bud that you're going to see are what are called adventitious buds, which are basically just little nubs that are going to appear as back buds further back down the branch. So here we don't have any of those adventitious buds, but we do have the needle bud here and the terminal buds. So keep that in mind as you're pulling old needles off. We don't want to damage any of those buds. All right, so as you can see, we've cleaned out the tree. And again, all I did was remove the needles from the underside of the branches and needles that were in between individual buds so that we can expose the structure a little bit better and apply the wire more easily. Now the next step in the process is going to be to remove unnecessary large branches on the tree and then decide exactly where we want the height of the tree to cap out. So as I mentioned before, this branch coming off to the far left of the tree really feels like it's stretching too far to the left and gives a really unbalanced feeling to the plant. So what I want to do is remove this out here, but we are going to keep this as a gin feature so that it continues to draw your eye in this direction without having all this visual mass out here at the end with the foliage. Another thing to consider is that there's a lot of verticality within the tree. So of course you have the main gin in the front there that's rising up and out. You've got this main trunk in the back here that I reduced the foliage off of at the top, but it also is sticking up and out. And of course we've got this secondary trunk line right here and this gin in the front, all of which are sort of moving in the same general direction to the left and up. I actually like the verticality of all of these. I think it really draws your eye up and out and makes it feel like it's a dragon flying up into the sky. So I want to keep a lot of that verticality, but I don't necessarily think that we need to make the tree as high as it is. So now, of course, right now, the highest point on the tree is this trunk towards the rear right here, but I think that's a little bit too tall on the tree, and it sort of detracts from the really interesting, very old gin running up the front side. So in my opinion, to really draw your eye to that nice deadwood feature that's already there and that's very old, I want to make that the highest point on the tree. So this gin right here. So everything else that we build will be shorter than that gin. Now what that means is that that gin becomes something called a tenjin, T-E-N-J-I-N. It's basically an apical gin or an apical piece of deadwood that sticks out and above the remaining foliage. The idea in keeping the foliage below the height of that is that it's supposed to indicate that the elements have beat the tree down to such a degree that it can't grow any taller than that piece of deadwood. So we're going to build the apex out of something around this general area, but first things first, I want to work on some of the deadwood features. Again, this gin right here we're going to reduce. We'll probably reduce the height of this a little bit, and then we're going to gin this branch as well. Now that we've cleaned up all of the deadwood features, we can start to decide what we're going to utilize in terms of branching and where we're going to build the apex. So what I want to do before that though is figure out exactly where the front of the tree is going to be, and that's going to be dictated by, again, trying to show off certain features and hide flaws. So one major flaw that's really standing out from the view where you're looking at the tree right now is the fact that our nice gin in the front here cuts across the trunk line back here for what will likely be our apex at the top. They compete with one another and they look a little bit strange. Now, it might be possible to manipulate that big branch in the back to create a nice movement out of that for the trunk line, but I think it's going to be a little bit difficult to do that. It's quite thick and this is a relatively brittle tree, so I don't necessarily want to finagle that around because I think it's going to end up looking somewhat contrived. So in my opinion, what would be best is if we actually rotate the tree to try to hide the fact that those two are crossing one another. So I'm going to rotate this tree just a few degrees clockwise, and we're going to see if we can manipulate this in a way where that actually disappears behind our gin in the front there. All right, so I think that actually did the trick. All I did was rotate it, say, about 10 degrees or so clockwise, and that put that vertical trunk in the back just behind the gin right here, but it still allows it to reappear over the top to build the apex out of it. I think that that looks a little bit better. It doesn't compete as much and your eye isn't drawn to that flaw anymore. So now that we've got sort of our basic front set up here, we can start to build the branch structure on the tree. Now, when I'm building the branch structure on whether it be a Yamadori raw piece of material like this or a highly refined piece of material, I almost always start with the first directional branch and then build the tree off of that. That gives me a nice basis to set the rest of the branch structure off of. So that branch on the far left over there that's dipping down, I'm going to put some wire on that. We're going to see if we can manipulate that into place to give us our first directional moving branch. So I've wired and set the lowest branch on the far left over there. We brought some of the foliage back in underneath to draw your eye again more towards the interior, so you start to notice this over here. Also in the middle section right here, I brought that foliage back around as well for the same purpose. Now the next step is going to be to set the backdrop of that picture frame here to really draw your eye back into this area. But that's going to require us to bend this branch right here way down, which means we're going to need to put some raffia on this branch to do that. So I'm going to tie some raffia around that branch, make it really nice and tight, and we're going to put actually some black tape around the exterior of that raffia to lock in the moisture, just in case we have some breakage or some tears on the live tissue there. That'll help keep the branch alive over the course of the winter into next growing season. So for a branch about this size, it's about the diameter of your thumb. So what I'm going to do here is tie about 8 to 10 strands of raffia together, soak them for a little while, and then we're going to wrap them on here. Now typically the directionality of the raffia, it needs to go the same direction as the wire, and that's all determined by which direction the branch is being bent. Well, with this particular branch, it's only coming straight down, so it doesn't really matter which direction the raffia and the wire go, so I'm not too concerned about that. If we were, for example, taking the branch from the backside around towards the front, I would want to go clockwise with the raffia and the wire, and if it were on the opposite side of the tree, we'd be going counterclockwise. So just keep that in mind when you're applying raffia and wire to heavy branches that need to be manipulated very heavily down into new positions.
Start it up. Start it up. This is lit.
So now that we've got the back branch and the side branch here, or the counterbalance branch on the right side of the tree set and in place, we're gonna start working on the apexes up at the top here. And as I said in the beginning of the demo, I thought we would probably turn this into a double apex tree, which is a little bit weird, but I think it's gonna work for this particular bonsai. So the first thing I'm gonna do is take this branch right here and try to get a little more motion in the trunk line here by dropping it down with some guy wires and then pulling it back up with some guy wires as well. We're gonna set that apex first, And then we're gonna build the main apex sort of right around this area here. Again, I'm not really gonna manipulate that back heavy trunk line right now. We may do a little bit of a guy wire to pull it slightly further forward, but I'm not gonna put motion in it side to side because again, we've hidden it mostly behind this gin right here. So first things first though, let's set that apex and then we'll move on to the main apex right here. So as you can see, this is the final initial rough styling of this pinyon pine. I'm really excited about how this tree turned out, but of course there are a number of years left in its development going forward, so this isn't the final product. Over the next few years, we're going to try to push back budding on this tree, which should be very, very easy. As a matter of fact, it has a lot of adventitious buds that formed in September this year that I spent a lot of time being very careful not to knock off as I was wiring the tree. So all of those are intact, meaning next year they should flush out and start producing more growth for us, which will actually fill in the foliage mass on the tree. So going forward, of course, we're going to work on branch ramification, making sure the tree stays healthy. And over the course of this winter, since we did a little bit of extreme bending on a few of the branches, we are going to protect this tree to some degree. It's okay if it gets down below freezing. It's not a problem. It is a desert tree, but it's a high elevation desert tree. It was collected at about 4,500 feet. So it can take cold temperatures, but for the safety of the roots and the safety of the tree, we are going to place it on the ground once temperatures start dipping down below freezing. So in the next couple of weeks, that's going to be what happens happens with this tree. We're going to protect it over the course of the winter, and then next year in the spring, we're going to start fertilizing it, see if we can really push a lot of growth on the plant. So I want to thank you guys for checking out this episode of Bonsai-U. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and subscribe down below. And if you really like what we do here at Bonsai-U and you want to support us even further, you can go to the link in the description down below and donate to help support Bonsai-U going forward. Thank you guys again for checking out the video. Till next time, take care.